In the frozen darkness of an Icelandic Christmas Eve, a massive shadow moves between houses, while children huddle in their beds praying they received new clothes that day. This is not a fairy tale, but a terror that has stalked Iceland for centuries. A monstrous cat the size of a house with eyes that glow like furnace fires and claws that can tear through wooden walls. The Jólakötturinn or Yule Cat hunts on Christmas Eve, and it has only one criteria for choosing its victims. Those who failed to receive new clothing before Christmas become its prey. For over 1,000 years, Icelandic parents have warned their children about this creature that prowls the winter darkness, searching for the lazy and the poor. But what makes this legend truly terrifying is that it was never meant to entertain. It was designed to motivate an entire nation to survive the deadliest season in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Tonight we descend into the disturbing world of Iceland's Christmas cat and discover why this ancient horror still haunts the modern world. If you're ready to look beyond the veil of forgotten myths and uncover the secrets the world chose to forget, subscribe to Inside Strange Times, so you won't miss new journeys into the realm of ancient mysteries. The story of the Yule Cat begins in the volcanic wastelands of medieval Iceland, where survival through winter meant the difference between life and death. In the year 930, when the first permanent settlers established their farms on this frozen island, they discovered that the darkness here was unlike anything they had known in Norway. December brought only 4 hours of pale daylight, while temperatures plummeted to minus 30 degrees Celsius, and blizzards could trap families in their turf houses for weeks. It was in this environment of perpetual night and bone-crushing cold that the Yule Cat was born. The earliest written mention of the creature appears in the 19th century, but scholars believe the tradition stretches back to the settlement period when every Icelandic household depended on sheep for survival. Wool was not a luxury, but the only barrier between human skin and death by freezing. The autumn wool harvest became the most critical event of the year, because without new clothing made from fresh wool, the old garments would be too worn and patched to survive another winter. This is where the terror of the Yule Cat served its purpose. Farm workers who completed the autumn wool processing received new clothes as payment, while those who failed to meet their quotas went without. The legend transformed this economic reality into supernatural horror. Parents would tell their children that the giant cat could smell the difference between new wool and old, that it prowled from farm to farm on Christmas Eve, checking who had been industrious and who had been lazy. The creature they described defied natural laws. Witnesses claimed it stood taller than the highest barn with a body that blocked out the stars and eyes that burned through the thickest blizzard. Its black fur absorbed all light, making it invisible against the winter night, except for those terrible glowing eyes. When it walked, the ground trembled, and its breathing sounded like wind howling through mountain caves. But the most terrifying aspect was its intelligence. The Yule Cat knew which children had new clothes and which did not. It could peer through walls and see into every corner of every house. There was no hiding from its supernatural sight. The connection between the Yule Cat and the ogress Gryla adds another layer of horror to the legend. Gryla herself is one of Iceland's oldest monsters. A giant woman with 15 tails who lives in a mountain cave with her third husband, Lepaludi, and their 13 sons, known as the Yule Lads. She has been devouring naughty children since the 13th century, when she first appeared in Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda. The Yule Cat became part of her household sometime in the medieval period, though scholars debate whether it was originally her pet or an independent creature that joined her family. What matters is that by the 17th century, the cat had become the enforcer of Gryla's terrible justice. While Gryla hunted for misbehaving children to cook in her cauldron, the Yule Cat targeted those who represented economic failure. Together, they created a complete system of terror that regulated both moral behavior and work ethic. The Icelandic historian Magnus Grimsson documented in 1864 that entire villages would stay awake on Christmas Eve, listening for the cat's approach. He interviewed elderly farmers who swore they had seen it prowling the lava fields, a moving darkness bigger than their houses, with eyes like lanterns. One account from the Westfjords describes how a poor family with 7 children huddled together on Christmas Eve, knowing they had no new clothes. The father had been injured during the autumn harvest and could not work the wool. The mother had done her best, but could not process enough for new garments. As midnight approached, they heard something circling their turf house, heavy breathing that shook the walls and footsteps that made the earth groan. The youngest child began crying, and the mother held him tight, whispering prayers. Then came the scratching, claws dragging across the wooden door, testing its strength. The family waited in absolute terror until dawn, when the sounds finally stopped. When they opened the door, they found massive paw prints in the snow, circling their home 3 times. The tracks led away toward the mountains, but everyone knew the cat would return next Christmas Eve. This story and hundreds like it served a crucial social function in medieval Iceland. In a society where laziness could literally kill your entire family, the Yule Cat transformed work ethic into a matter of supernatural survival. Children who might resist the tedious labor of carding and spinning wool would work frantically when reminded that the cat was watching. The tradition became so embedded in Icelandic culture that even the church could not eradicate it. When Christianity arrived in the year 1000, the clergy tried to replace pagan monsters with Christian morality, but the Yule Cat proved too useful to abandon. Instead of disappearing, the creature evolved. By the 14th century, the cat had been incorporated into Christian Christmas traditions as a reminder that God helps those who help themselves. Priests would warn their congregations that, while Christ offered salvation for the soul, the Yule Cat still enforced earthly justice. This blending of pagan terror and Christian teaching created a unique theological monster that existed nowhere else in Europe. The wool industry that gave birth to the Yule Cat was itself a matter of life and death in medieval Iceland. Sheep arrived with the first settlers and quickly became the foundation of the entire economy. An average family needed at least 20 sheep to survive, enough to provide meat for the winter and wool for clothing. But Icelandic sheep were different from their European cousins. Natural selection in the harsh environment created animals with a unique double-layered fleece, soft insulating down underneath and water-resistant guard hairs on top. This wool, called lopi, became legendary across medieval Europe for its warmth and durability. Processing this wool required the entire household working from September through December. First came the sorting, where women and children separated the soft undercoat from the coarse outer fibers. Then the cleaning, which involved multiple washes in precious heated water. After that came carding, where the wool was combed between 2 boards studded with metal teeth until the fibers aligned. Next was spinning, where skilled hands transformed loose fiber into strong thread. Finally came knitting or weaving, which could take weeks for a single garment. Every member of the household, from age 5 to 70, had a role in this process. The youngest children picked debris from raw wool, while elderly grandparents spun thread by the fire. Teenagers carded until their arms ached, and parents worked the looms late into the night. This was not mere tradition, but survival mathematics. A single adult needed at minimum one new set of clothes per year to replace what had worn out. Children growing rapidly might need 2 sets. A family of 6 required processing wool from at least 12 sheep just for basic clothing. Add in blankets and trade goods, and the number doubled. Failure at any stage of this process meant someone would face winter without adequate protection. The Yule Cat transformed this economic reality into visceral fear. Archaeological evidence from medieval Icelandic settlements reveals just how seriously people took the clothing deadline. Excavations at Stung, in southern Iceland, uncovered a farmhouse abandoned in 1104 after a volcanic eruption. Among the preserved artifacts, archaeologists found multiple spinning wheels and looms positioned near the main hearth, evidence of frantic wool processing. More telling were the needle cases and thread boxes found in sleeping quarters, suggesting people were sewing by candlelight in bed. The pressure to finish new clothes before Christmas pushed entire communities into overdrive. The sagas mention women going blind from sewing in poor light and children's fingers bleeding from endless carding. But the alternative was worse than temporary pain. To be caught without new clothes on Christmas Eve marked you as either lazy or poor, both potentially fatal conditions in medieval Iceland. The lazy faced starvation because they had not prepared for winter, while the poor lacked the resources to survive. Either way, the Yule Cat would find you. The physical descriptions of the cat grew more terrifying with each generation. By the 17th century, witnesses claimed it could leap across entire valleys in a single bound, and its roar could trigger avalanches. Its claws were said to be made of ice that never melted, and its breath carried the smell of sulfur from volcanic vents. Some stories describe it changing size, small enough to slip through a keyhole, then expanding to devour an entire household. The recurring detail in every account was the eyes. Burning orange like molten lava, or glowing green like the northern lights, always visible through the worst blizzard, always watching, always searching. Children would see those eyes in their nightmares and wake screaming that the cat had found them. Parents used these nightmares as teaching moments. When a child complained about helping with the wool, the parent would ask if they wanted to see those eyes on Christmas Eve. The threat worked because, unlike other childhood monsters, the Yule Cat had a basis in observable reality. Everyone knew someone who had died during winter from inadequate clothing. The connection between new clothes and survival was not metaphorical, but literal. The cat simply gave a face to the very real danger of winter exposure. This grounding in reality made the legend especially powerful. Children could dismiss stories of trolls and elves as fairy tales, but the Yule Cat represented something they witnessed every winter. Neighbors who failed to prepare adequately did disappear during blizzards. Bodies were found frozen in spring, wearing threadbare clothes. The cat might be supernatural, but its consequences were absolutely real. The tradition also reinforced social bonds within communities. Wealthy farmers who employed many workers had to provide new clothes for everyone or risk the cat's attention. This created an incentive for fair treatment and timely payment. A farmer who cheated his workers out of new clothes might find his entire household targeted. The cat did not distinguish between those who withheld clothing and those who went without. Some stories tell of greedy masters who died on Christmas Eve despite having warehouses full of wool because they had denied clothes to their workers. The cat judged the household as a whole, not individual. This collective punishment encouraged mutual support. Families would help struggling neighbors finish their wool processing, and communities would ensure orphans and widows received new clothes. The alternative was too terrible to contemplate. One documented case from 1812 describes an entire village in the East Fjords working through Christmas Eve to finish clothes for a family whose father had died in October. The widow and her 5 children would never have completed the wool processing alone. As midnight approached, neighbors arrived with spinning wheels and needles. They worked by candlelight as snow piled against the windows and wind howled through the roof. Just as the church bells rang midnight, they tied off the last thread on the youngest child's new shirt. Everyone waited in silence, listening for the cat. When dawn came without incident, the entire village celebrated their victory over the monster. But not every story ended successfully. The archives in Reykjavik contain death records that spiked dramatically on December 24th and 25th during the Little Ice Age. While natural causes explain most deaths, the timing suggests the Yule Cat legend reflected real mortality patterns. People who entered winter without adequate clothing were more likely to die during the coldest part of the season, which coincided with Christmas. The cat gave narrative structure to these deaths, transforming random tragedy into moral lesson. The most disturbing accounts of the Yule Cat come from the 1800s, when Iceland suffered its darkest period since settlement. The Mother Hearthenden, or mist hardships, began in 1783 when the Laki volcano erupted and poisoned the entire island with fluorine gas. Over the next decade, 20% of the population died, and those who survived faced winters so brutal that cannibalism became common. It was during this nightmare that the Yule Cat transformed from legend into something far more sinister. John Arneson, who collected Icelandic folktales in the 1860s, interviewed survivors who claimed the cat had become real during those terrible years. One woman from Skaftafell told him she had watched the creature devour her younger brother on Christmas Eve 1785. The family had nothing: no food, no fuel, and certainly no new clothes. They huddled together in their crumbling turf house as volcanic ash fell like black snow and fluorine poisoning made their teeth fall out. Just after midnight, something massive struck their door with such force that the entire structure shook. The door exploded inward, and through the swirling ash came eyes like burning coals. The creature filled the doorway, black fur matted with ice and volcanic ash, while its breath steamed in the frozen air. It reached one enormous paw inside and grabbed the boy, who had been too weak from hunger to run. His sister watched paralyzed as the cat dragged him into the darkness. They found his clothes the next morning torn to shreds, but no body. Never any body. The woman was 73 when she told this story, and she wept as if it had happened yesterday. She insisted it was not metaphor or hallucination, but a real creature that had taken her brother. Modern psychiatrists studying trauma in isolated populations suggest the Yule Cat served as a coping mechanism for survivor guilt. When children died from cold or starvation, blaming a monster was easier than accepting that poverty had killed them. But this explanation fails to account for the consistency of the descriptions across hundreds of independent accounts. Every witness describes the same details: the impossible size, the glowing eyes, the ability to appear and disappear without tracks. Either an entire nation shared the exact same hallucination for centuries, or something was actually stalking the winter darkness. The Reverend Matthias Joachimsson, who later wrote Iceland's national anthem, documented an encounter in 1847 that haunted him until his death. He was traveling between parishes on December 23rd, when a blizzard forced him to seek shelter at an isolated farm. The family welcomed him, but he noticed immediately that something was wrong. The children sat silent by the fire, while the parents exchanged worried glances. Finally, the farmer explained that they had lost their sheep to disease that summer and had no wool for new clothes. The Reverend tried to comfort them with scripture, but the farmer shook his head. "God helps those who help themselves," he said, "and we have failed to help ourselves." That night, the Reverend was awakened by a sound he described as breathing, but magnified 100-fold. The entire house vibrated with each exhale, and the air grew thick with the smell of sulfur. Through the window, he saw eyes larger than dinner plates scanning the house. The creature circled 3 times, and each pass brought those eyes closer to the window. On the 3rd pass, the eyes stopped directly outside, and the Reverend found himself staring into pupils that reflected not his face, but his deepest fears. He clutched his Bible and prayed, while children whimpered and parents held them tight. Just before dawn, the breathing stopped and the eyes vanished. The Reverend left at first light, but learned later that the family's youngest son had died on Christmas night. The parents claimed illness, but neighbors whispered about claw marks on the door. What makes these historical accounts especially chilling is that they continue into the modern era. In 1932, a schoolteacher named Sigríður Björnsdóttir reported that children in her remote village were refusing to attend school in December. When she investigated, she discovered that several families had failed to provide new clothes due to the economic depression. The children genuinely believed the Yule Cat would kill them if they ventured outside after dark. She tried to convince them it was just a story, but on December 22nd, something killed all the sheep in the village in a single night. The animals were found with their throats torn out, arranged in a perfect circle around the schoolhouse. No predator in Iceland could have done this. No wolf or fox or dog. The kill pattern suggested something much larger, and the tracks in the snow were unlike anything the villagers had seen. School was canceled until after New Year, and several families fled to Reykjavik rather than face Christmas Eve. The psychological impact of the Yule Cat on Icelandic children has been studied extensively by modern researchers. Dr. Christine Lofsdottir at the University of Iceland interviewed hundreds of adults about their childhood memories of the tradition. 93% reported genuine fear of the cat lasting well into adolescence. Many described checking for new clothes obsessively in the weeks before Christmas and panicking if parents seemed behind on sewing. Some developed anxiety disorders triggered by the sound of cats or the approach of winter. One man, born in 1958, told her he still cannot sleep on Christmas Eve because he spent his entire childhood listening for the cat. His parents were poor farmers who struggled every year to provide new clothes. Some years they succeeded, and some years they did not. On the years they failed, the family would barricade themselves inside and wait for dawn. He remembered his mother stuffing rags under the door to block any opening, and his father sitting by the window with an old rifle that everyone knew would be useless. The terror was not that they believed the cat was real, but that they could not be certain it was not. This uncertainty defines the Icelandic relationship with the Yule Cat even today. A 2018 survey found that 62% of Icelanders will not definitively say the cat does not exist. This is not superstition, but cultural memory of genuine danger dressed in narrative form. The tradition survived industrialization and modernization because its core message remains relevant. Preparation and hard work are still necessary for survival, even if the consequences are no longer supernatural. The Yule Cat has evolved in contemporary Iceland into something more complex than simple monster. Modern artists and writers have reimagined it as everything from environmental metaphor to capitalist critique. The poet Jóhannes or Kötlum wrote in 1932 that the cat represents the devouring nature of poverty itself. It cannot be fought or reasoned with, only avoided through constant vigilance and labor. His poem Jólakötturinn became so popular that it redefined the creature for 20th century Iceland. Rather than external monster, the cat became internal anxiety, the fear that you have not done enough to protect those you love. This psychological interpretation resonates with modern Icelanders who face different but equally real challenges. The 2008 financial crisis brought the Yule Cat roaring back into public consciousness. As thousands lost their jobs and homes, the old stories about families without new clothes suddenly felt immediate again. Charities reported record donations of clothing in December as people remembered what it meant to face winter unprepared. One Reykjavik woman told reporters she had not thought about the cat since childhood, but found herself buying extra clothes for donation because she could not bear the thought of children facing Christmas Eve without protection. The tradition had activated something primal, a cultural immune system against communal disaster. Contemporary sightings of the Yule Cat cluster around economic downturns and harsh winters. In December 2010, during one of the worst blizzards in decades, multiple drivers on Route 1 reported seeing enormous eyes in their headlights. In December 2010, during one of the worst blizzards in decades, multiple drivers on Route 1 reported seeing enormous eyes in their headlights. The eyes appeared above the road's surface at impossible height and moved against the wind. One truck driver said he saw a shape larger than his vehicle pass through his headlight beams, solid enough to block the light, but somehow translucent. The police dismissed these reports as weather hallucinations, but the drivers insisted they had seen something that should not exist. The most recent documented encounter occurred on Christmas Eve 2022 in the West Fjords. A family celebrating at their remote farmhouse reported that their security cameras captured something extraordinary. At exactly midnight, the motion sensors triggered and recorded a massive shape circling the house. The figure was partially obscured by falling snow, but thermal imaging showed a heat signature unlike any known animal. It stood upright at certain moments, reaching nearly 3 meters in height, then dropped to all fours, moving with impossible speed. The family huddled inside, listening to something scraping against their walls, while their young daughter kept asking if they all had new clothes. They did. The mother had made sure of it. By morning, the creature was gone, but the camera footage remained. When they posted it online, the video went viral with millions debating whether it showed the real Yule Cat or elaborate hoax. Experts analyzed the footage and found no evidence of digital manipulation, but could not explain what the cameras had captured. The family refuses to spend Christmas at the farmhouse anymore. The contemporary Yule Cat serves a different function than its medieval predecessor, but remains equally powerful. Climate change has made Icelandic winters unpredictable, with sudden temperature swings and unprecedented storms. The old certainties about weather patterns have vanished, and with them the ability to prepare adequately. The cat now represents not just poverty, but environmental collapse, the consequences of failing to prepare for changes we cannot fully understand. Young Icelanders have embraced this interpretation, creating art and music that portrays the cat as nature's revenge. One popular band released an album called Jólakötturinn, where each song represents a different aspect of climate anxiety. The title track features recordings of actual glacier collapses mixed with traditional descriptions of the cat's roar. The effect is genuinely terrifying, a sound that seems both ancient and immediate. This cultural evolution demonstrates how folklore adapts to address contemporary fears. The Yule Cat no longer punishes individual laziness, but collective failure to address existential threats. We all lack new clothes in the metaphorical sense, unprepared for the winter that is coming. Tourism has added another layer to the Yule Cat phenomenon. Visitors flock to Iceland for Christmas, hoping to experience authentic folklore, but what they find is more complex than expected. Tour guides tell sanitized versions of the story, while locals share whispered accounts of recent sightings. One hotel in Akureyri offers a Yule Cat experience where guests spend Christmas Eve in a reconstructed medieval farmhouse. They wear period clothing and participate in traditional wool processing, while actors create disturbing effects outside. But several guests have reported experiencing things that were not part of the program. Eyes in windows where no actor could reach, and breathing sounds that came from inside the walls. The hotel claims these reports are psychological projection, but their security footage from December 23, 2019 tells a different story. At 3:17 in the morning, every camera on the property recorded the same thing: a massive shadow passing through the courtyard. The shadow had no source and moved independently of wind or weather. It paused at each guest room window as if checking something, then continued to the next. The hotel management deleted the footage, but employees saved copies, which occasionally surface online. What they show is impossible to explain rationally. The scholarly debate about the Yule Cat reveals deep divisions in how we understand folklore. Anthropologists argue it represents economic anxiety transformed into manageable narrative. Psychologists see it as collective trauma processing from centuries of winter mortality. Historians trace its evolution through documented accounts, showing how each generation adapted the story to their fears. But none of these explanations address why the physical descriptions remain so consistent. Every witness, from medieval farmers to modern drivers, describes the same impossible creature. The eyes that burn without fire and see without light. The size that defies physics and the presence that violates natural law. Either hundreds of generations have shared the same specific delusion, or they have encountered something that exists outside our understanding. The children of Iceland do not care about academic debates. They know what they feel on Christmas Eve when wind rattles windows and shadows move strangely. They check their new clothes obsessively and wonder if tradition alone is enough protection. Parents who swore they would not perpetuate the fear find themselves warning children about the importance of preparation. The story escapes conscious control emerging from cultural memory when darkness falls. Some traditions are chosen, but others choose themselves. The Yule Cat belongs to the second category, a story that tells itself through generations, regardless of our intentions. As climate change accelerates and economic systems falter, the cat grows stronger in collective imagination. It waits in the margins of perception, where reason fails and instinct takes over. We tell ourselves it is just a story while checking that everyone has new clothes. We laugh about superstition while avoiding windows on Christmas Eve. We explain the tradition to tourists while remembering our own childhood terror. The truth about the Yule Cat is that it does not matter whether it physically exists. What matters is that an entire culture has agreed for 1,000 years that something watches us in winter darkness, judging whether we have prepared adequately for survival. This shared vigilance has saved countless lives, even if the threat was economic rather than supernatural. The cat serves its purpose, whether real or imagined. On this Christmas Eve, as you sit warm in your modern home, consider the Icelanders who still listen for footsteps in the snow. They know something we have forgotten in our electric comfort, that winter does not forgive the unprepared. The Yule Cat embodies this merciless truth in a form too terrible to ignore. It prowls the boundary between folklore and reality, between what we know and what we fear. And on the darkest night of the year, when wind howls and shadows dance, perhaps it crosses that boundary. Perhaps it always has. The children of Iceland will have new clothes this Christmas, as they have for 1,000 years. Not because parents can afford them, but because parents cannot afford to risk the alternative. This is the true power of the Yule Cat. It transforms poverty from circumstance into choice. You can face winter unprepared, but you cannot claim ignorance of the consequences. The glowing eyes have been watching since the settlement age, and they remember everyone who failed the test. In the volcanic darkness of an Icelandic Christmas, the boundary between legend and reality dissolves. Ancient fears merge with modern anxieties, creating something that belongs to neither past nor present. The Yule Cat exists in this liminal space, too consistent to dismiss and too impossible to accept. It is the price Iceland pays for surviving in a land that should not support human life. Every culture has its monsters, but few have monsters that serve such practical purpose. The Yule Cat does not merely frighten, it instructs and motivates and judges. It transforms abstract danger into concrete narrative that even children can understand. Work hard or die, prepare adequately or perish, contribute to the community or face the consequences. These lessons kept Icelanders alive through volcanic winters and economic collapses. They will keep Icelanders alive through whatever comes next. As midnight approaches on Christmas Eve 2025, somewhere in Iceland, a child asks if their clothes are new enough. Their parent smiles and says yes while secretly checking the locks. Outside in the frozen darkness, something moves between the houses. Its eyes glow with ancient hunger, and its breath carries the smell of volcanic stone. It remembers every family that failed to prepare and every child who went without new clothes. The Yule Cat is patient, and the Yule Cat is eternal. It has stalked Iceland for 1,000 years and will stalk it for 1,000 more. Because as long as winter threatens human survival, something must enforce the terrible mathematics of preparation. Something must ensure that when darkness falls and temperature drops, everyone has what they need to survive. That something has eyes like furnace fires and claws like frozen death. It circles your house 3 times, testing your readiness. And if you have failed to prepare, if you have ignored the warnings and dismissed the stories, if you believe that modern life has freed you from ancient necessities, then you will learn what countless generations have known. The Yule Cat is not a metaphor. The Yule Cat is not a memory. The Yule Cat is the cold mathematical truth of winter given form and consciousness. And it is coming. Listen carefully on Christmas Eve, and you might hear it breathing. Check your children's clothes and lock your doors and pray to whatever gods you trust. Because in the frozen heart of winter, when civilization's comfort fails and darkness reclaims the world, the old bargains still hold. New clothes or death, preparation or perishing. The Yule Cat enforces these terms without mercy or exception. It has yellow eyes and blackest fur and hunger that spans centuries. And tonight, on this longest, darkest night, it walks among us still, watching, waiting, remembering,